Welcome everybody to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. I am your host, Deadponic, and with me is Queen Byron, as always.
Yes, hello everyone.
Without her, this podcast would probably have died at conception. But anyway, okay. And if you guys enjoy our podcast, as always, you can go to patreon.com/Dragonus Podcast to support us. Byron, would you like to explain what this episode is about, since this was your idea?
Sure. We're going to talk about popular changes, homebrew rules, or additions to the 5th edition rule set for Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah. Would you, for those who are confused in our audience, could you actually explain what homebrew actually means, so we're not, jumping?
Yeah. So, Dungeons & Dragons has a long history of improv and making up your own things. Homebrew is typically what it's called when you kind of have, brewed it at home, if you will, where you either have made up a storyline, NPC, monster, or a rule. In this case, we're talking about rules that are not in the player's handbook that are either considered optional or popular changes to traditional rules, things that are outside the norm, even if they are widely adopted, things that are different than what's written in the player's handbook.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you want to start us off with your list of, the first thing on your list of what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. So one rule that I like a lot that I use in my games, and I think that this is probably one of the most widely adopted homebrew rules. A lot of people have attributed it to Matt Mercer, but I think it goes well beyond that. It's drinking a potion as a bonus action. Normally, when you have a potion and you're going to drink it, that would cost your main action, but that means you can't attack or cast a spell or do other things like that. So I like to use this rule where you can drink a potion as a bonus action. However, if you want to administer it to someone else or feed it to someone else, or perhaps kind of like Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, you want to pour it on their wounds, that takes a full action. So drinking it for yourself is a bonus action, but administering it to someone else so they can heal would be considered a full action.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Now, would that apply to something like first aid, where or is that considered a regular action?
Yeah, usually healing someone in any way like that is considered like a regular action. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so on my list that I managed to find, one of the ones that I find interesting is lingering injuries, which is basically it's the idea of if you say, I don't know, if you mess up your hip or something, or your leg or something like that, that wound stays and no amount of healing is going to cure that. The most common that I know about, from what I understand, is the idea of when you lose a limb, generally you can't reattach the limb. So you usually get a prosthetic for that, or you get something similar to that. That would be an example of a lingering injury, which has a lot of roleplay potential, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to put into a game, because you can get your hand cut off and you can pull a Luke Skywalker, and yeah, you get your hand back. Well, you get a new hand, technically.
Right.
It depends where, and also this doesn't just apply to your hand. It can apply to your leg. It can apply to almost any body part, save for the head.
Yep.
All right. Next on your list.
Yeah, so another rule that I like a lot. This one is a lot less popular though. In fact, I've never heard of anyone else using it, but I have adopted a rule. My parties really seem to like it. Where standing from prone takes 15 feet of your movement versus half. So normally let's say you're laying on the ground in the battlefield and you want to stand up, that would take half of your movement speed. Now, traditionally, most characters have a 30-foot movement speed, but not always. If you're a size small, you would have a 25 movement speed. But there are also bonuses that lots of classes can get, especially monks get to their speed. And let's say for some reason, spell, a magic item, or just a class feature, your speed is currently 60 feet. Well, you're twice as fast as everyone else. However, in that case, standing from prone would also take twice as much effort as everyone else officially, right? Because 60 feet halved would be 30 feet. So to stand from prone, it would take 30 feet of your movement. I've never really loved that idea. So I've made it in my games where it's a flat 15 feet to stand from prone. Now, if you're small and you only have a 25-foot movement speed, yes, it may hurt you, may be detrimental specifically to you, but if you have 25 feet, how do you split that in half? 12 and a half. It gets a little funny when you're dealing with 5-foot increments. So I think it just solves the problem of determining where 12 and a half feet lie and just helping the monks too to be even faster.
I agree with that. Um, one of one of my rules that I really enjoy is the that I often use is ignoring material requirements for spells, because now this goes back all the way back to like original D&D, but basically the idea is that spells require materials. They require, be it a diamond, being a gold piece, being a specific item, in order to cast that spell specifically. But by removing the material requirements, not only do you not have to worry about that, but it makes the flow of the game much better. And plus, it opens up more possibilities for other ways for spells to play a role, which is how most of from what I understand from what I've read is how most D&D campaigns work, is that there's some figment of magic in there that keeps the flow going.
Hmm.
So what is the crit fumble table thing that you got on your notes here? I'm curious about that actually.
So this isn't a rule that I use, but I know that a lot of people enjoy things like this, kind of like you were talking about lingering injuries. A lot of DMs, a lot of tables will choose to use crit fumbles and have a table for that. So when you roll an attack roll, if you get a 1 on the die on the d20, that's considered an auto fail. And normally, and as rules is written, that's the end of it. But some people choose to include a fumble or another kind of effect that happens when you roll a natural 1. So maybe your shot doesn't just miss, but maybe your arrow hits your friend, or maybe your spell explodes. And there's lots of different critical fumble tables out there. If you're interested, I highly recommend, looking up some of the more popular ones. But a lot of it comes down to kind of like roleplay flavor, like you were talking about, roleplay opportunities, and kind of livening up a battle and having different things happen, unexpected things happen.
Yeah. One particular story that's kind of infamous among my friends is that they were this was like level 1 2 I think, but they were taking on a pair of like a pack of dire wolves. My NPC is up in the trees. He fires an arrow. He rolls a 1. It bounces off a tree and uh hits one of the players in the foot. It reminds me of that.
Ouch.
It reminds me of that scene from Ace Ventura, I believe it is, where Jim Carrey like gets a spear through the kneecap, and it's great. I love that. That is very funny. It can lead to a lot of funny moments.
Hmm.
My another rule that I like to follow. Well, I don't generally follow this rule, but it's kind of like an innate thing, but ignoring drawing and switching weapons, that is kind of, I don't know if that's actually like become ingrained in the rules, but I think most people just accept it as a thing rather than, just having like an official standing rule. But if you're like want to switch weapons in the middle of combat, it kind of makes sense that you would take an action to do that. But that's one I'm always kind of scratching my head on, because I don't know if that's a rule to follow, or is that just kind of a guideline?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, it depends on kind of the situation, but I think a lot of DMs kind of rule that if you're willing to just drop your weapon on the battlefield, you can switch to anything you're already kind of carrying or like, nearly prepared to use. If you wanted to like stow your sword in your bag or put your bow like away, then that would take, more time, and obviously that could eat into your actions. But I think a lot of people just end up kind of dropping whatever weapon they were using and then, like you said, switching to whatever they wanted.
Yeah. Let's talk about feats. So,
Yeah.
feats as an idea is something that I'm for. Um, Most people I know do kind of follow the feat system, but I like to know what your stance is on it. Usually,
Yeah, so one thing that I think is kind of commonly misunderstood is that feats are technically an optional rule, right? You don't have to play with them if your DM or if your table decides that you don't want them in your games. Then yeah, absolutely choose that. In earlier editions, they had a much greater focus and there were more options, and you had like branching feats and like feat tiers and things like that. In fifth edition, they are adding more with, different books have come out. There's more feats available. They have racial feats and things like that, which are really fun. But I personally am a huge fan of feats, and I love to play with them, and I love to see the players choose them to give really a lot of flavor to their characters. With the different things that feats can do, you can add a lot of roleplay opportunities and a lot of mechanical benefits in small areas to characters. So, it's not super overpowered, but you can have a character who, attacks retreating enemies, or maybe now you can speak to your friends telekinetically, or you gain the Misty Step, different little things like that, which is why I really like feats. And I have two rules that I like to use with feats. First of all, I like to give every character a free feat at first level to get that, customization started right away so they can customize their character, really build it out how they envision it, and be able to do the things that they want to do. And then the other rule that I actually really like is giving a feat every time the character would receive an ability score improvement. And now this has been a bit controversial. Some of the people I've kind of mentioned this to have said that it's kind of overpowered or maybe it's too strong. But I found that I really enjoy, again, seeing the customization that the characters can come up with when you don't have to choose. So an ability score improvement is when you would get +2 to add to your ability scores, either 2 to 1 score or +1 to 2 different scores. So you can increase your constitution, maybe you want more hit points, or if you want to increase your, strength, you can hit harder, things like that. But I like to also give a feat alongside that, again, to see the customization, to see how the characters really come to life with the feats and the different, small abilities that they can earn.
you know what? It reminds me a lot of a lot of the Bioware games, like the first two KOTOR games, where every other level you get on top of your ability scores, you actually get like a feat, which is indicative. I
Yeah.
mean, the Star Wars role playing game is its own different system, but it's taken a lot from D&D, and they fully incorporated the feat system, but it's the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what's your stance on the rule of cool?
Yeah, I like it a lot. Excuse me, but I had to be kind of careful because I have people at my tables a lot of the times who will try and abuse certain things. So I tend to play rules as written, but if there is a moment that could happen, I like to relax the rules every once in a while. One time, my players were in kind of a dungeon, but all the walls and the floors and everything was made out of dirt, right? Packed earth. And one of the characters knew that there was an enemy on the other side of the dirt wall, and they wanted to stab them through the wall. And I said, okay, if you can roll high enough on your attack roll, then yeah, that it's gonna happen. And she rolled a natural 20, and she stabbed the guy through a wall. So fun moments like that, I'm all for.
For me, it's more of building the world rather than any like combat encounters or role playing encounters. I always like for my world specifically, they have this. The world is basically it's semi like a little bit. It has just enough like future tech, like say like full-on hospitals, like um treaded wagons, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it's done in such a way that it's not too outlandish and it's not too futuristic. It's kind of like a steampunky thing.
Mhm.
The only thing is that um it's more the story for me is more, it's more to enhance the gameplay rather than the gameplay enhancing the story, because that's just the way I DM.
Mhm.
Um so speaking of nat 20s, let's talk about critical hits, cuz that seems to be one of the ones that kind of is like really up in the air from what I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, a lot of people like to homebrew this rule as well. I'm not a huge fan of it. I hear the issues people have. They say, you know, like if you rolled a crit, they want to be able to deal damage. You know, it sucks to double your damage dice only to see, you know, all ones on the damage dice. But for me personally, I am of the opinion that, you know, we choose to generate random numbers with dice, and that's what I like to do. You know, if a lot of people will adopt a rule where they'll take when you get a normally when you get a critical hit, you double all the damage dice that you would roll for that attack. A lot of people change that to have basically max damage on the first set of dice and then rolling one set of dice, right? So if your weapon does 1d6, then you would take 6 plus a 1d6 rolled and then add your modifiers, and that would be your total damage output. For me personally, I don't love this rule because I like to keep it rules as written for critical hits, which is just rolling double the damage dice, right? Because I like to see what the numbers come up on the dice. You know, if it was meant to be a strong blow, then dice will show that, and if it was meant to be, you know, less damage, then that's what the dice will show as well. So, I personally am a huge fan of rolling dice, generating random numbers, and those sorts of things. So I normally don't change the way that crits work, but I know that a lot of people do.
There used to be like my dad actually had like a giant table of what happens like when you roll a nat 20, and like certain things will happen, like not to on top of the damage, like you would roll percentile die and see what
Mhm.
happens. Like for example, if you roll like say I don't know like a 75, you cut the guy's arm off, or you can cut off one of his limbs. It's thankfully that system is gone because that's really hard to keep track of, thank goodness.
Mhm.
But it's interesting how the nat 20 system has evolved from that.
Mhm.
I personally, I don't mind I just do like, so critical hit plus uh well, like you said, but I kind of play around with it. It's not, it's one of those things, it's just it's difficult to keep track of, so I kind of just simplify it.
Mhm.
Um, so for our, so for the last rule that we've got listed here, this is um this is an interesting one that I found. Helping the help action for skill rolls requires proficiency in that skill. So for example, if you the most common example is moving like a giant stone. Um, if the person trying to move it um doesn't have like a high enough strength modifier and strength roll, then you can, the person who chooses to help them can um actually apply their modifier and their proficiency to that roll to help that person out. It's a it's a very unique role, and I think I'm not sure if like if when we eventually get the new edition, if that's going to be started implemented, but it's an interesting rule that can really, like, it emphasizes the whole like uh no person is like a solo bird, and it's a party thing, so the party usually helps out. it does
Yeah.
come it does come with its downsides though. So like for example, if like the wizard is trying to move the stone, they're generally not going to have a high strength stat, or they're not going to be proficient in strength, so they're not going to be able to do that. And helping someone with that particular skill requires proficiency in that skill, which is important, and it also kind of is good for the for like keeping track of who has what in terms of their character sheet, which I find works. It takes a lot off my mind when I don't have to look at everybody's character sheet and say, "Oh, you've got this, you can help this." It's where the party is working together and they're able to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, I think it allows players who are proficient in skills to be able to kind of get the first chance to roll successfully. Um, a lot of times, this isn't necessarily a homebrew rule, but kind of a procedure. A lot of times when I have, a call for a skill check or something like this, and then I'll say I'll allow 2 people to like roll history to see if you can remember where this baron is from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the players can decide amongst themselves who has the highest modifier or bonus to history. And then that allows the people who are actually, kind of put points in those skills or spent their character options on learning those skills to be able to be the ones to roll for the skills that are called for. So along with, at requiring anyone providing the help action on a skill to be proficient, that kind of ensures that while the fighter may hit well in combat, he's probably not going to recall where the Baron is from randomly because while he's not trained in history, he rolled a natural 20, right? So I think it allows the characters who have specialties to shine, and that's always a good thing.
That's always a good thing, and it really emphasizes the whole thing about about the
Yeah,
party, not an individual person.
right.
All
D&D
right.
is a cooperative game, folks.
Yes. Um, there is no I. Actually, technically, yes, there is an I in team if you really look hard enough. But for the sake of the
Yeah, but you have to ruin the team first.
yeah,
Haha.
exactly. Yeah, it's a team. It's a cooperative game, and
Yep.
those who go off alone usually die alone,
Mhm.
as the saying goes. Anyway, so any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I'd like to hear from our audience if you have homebrew rules that you really love and that you implement at every table or that your DM uses. Let us know in the comments. Or if you
Absolutely.
disagree with any of our assessments, let us know.
Yeah. And stay tuned. So next week we are covering we're covering Paladin, which, oh boy, I have a lot to say about that. Actually, wait, hang on. Yeah, it is Paladin. Yeah, sorry, we're going in alphabetical order.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Paladin's up next.
yeah,
I think we're gonna have a spirited discussion, let's say.
yes, yes, we are. Anyway, we'll see you guys next time.